is what we want. Instead, we're still getting bullshit on viewership numbers.
And to be quite honest with you, I'm disgusted. I'm disgusted with Sue Bird.
Something happened during the 2024 WNBA playoffs that the league really does not want you talking about. Ratings collapsed. Ticket prices at some venues fell so low they were practically being given away. And one of the most respected names in women's basketball history suddenly turned around and started throwing punches at the very people telling the truth about it. What you're about to hear is the full story, the numbers, the feuds, the reversals, and the uncomfortable reality that is sitting right at the center of all of it. And once you see how all the pieces connect, it is genuinely hard to look at the WNBA the same way again. Before we get into it, if you find yourself learning something new in this video, do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. It is completely free, takes about 2 seconds, and it means you will never miss a breakdown like this one.
ESPN. So because I work at my day job on ESPN, I'm supposed to ignore the fact?
Now, let's get into what is really going on. Here is what made this entire situation impossible to ignore. The moment Caitlin Clark's Indiana Fever were eliminated from the 2024 WNBA playoffs, something measurable and undeniable happened almost immediately. Attendance figures dipped. Television viewership dropped sharply. And in some cities, playoff game tickets, games that should have represented the pinnacle of the women's basketball season, were being listed for as low as $10. $10 for playoff game.
Tickets at the Target Center in Minnesota selling for as low as $10.
At the Target Center in Minnesota, courtside seats that would normally command premium prices sat visibly empty. Fans watching the broadcast at home could see it with their own eyes. Yet the league continued to push out messaging about growth, momentum, and record-breaking progress. The contradiction between what people were being told and what people were actually seeing created a level of frustration that quickly spilled beyond fan forums and onto national television. To understand why this matters so much, you have to understand what the WNBA looked like with Caitlin Clark in the picture. Her viewership numbers during the regular season were, by any honest measure, astronomical. Games featuring Clark drew audiences that the league had not seen in years, in some cases ever. New fans who had never previously followed women's basketball were tuning in specifically to watch her play. Casual sports fans, people who normally devoted their attention entirely to the NBA or college football, suddenly had a reason to care about what was happening on a WNBA court on a Tuesday night. And then she was gone from the playoffs. And the contrast was jarring in a way that no amount of positive spin could fully conceal.
There is a Caitlin Clark effect on all of basketball, and especially on women's basketball ratings. Kudos to her. She has elevated an entire sport in view.
This is where things get genuinely surprising, because Sue Bird is not just any voice in this conversation. She is arguably the most decorated player in WNBA history. 12-time All-Star for championship rings. A figure who has spent her entire post-playing career advocating loudly and passionately for the growth and long-term health of women's basketball. When Sue Bird speaks, people listen. Her credibility in this space is essentially unquestioned, which is exactly why what she said, and who she said it to, caught so many people completely off guard. When Stephen A. Smith and Shannon Sharpe began openly discussing the ratings decline and what it revealed about the league's dependence on Caitlin Clark's star power, Sue Bird did not engage with the argument on its merits. Instead, she went after the messengers.
Stephen A. Smith talk about it. I've seen Shannon Sharpe talk about it. And that's what I just don't understand is they work for ESPN. So why are you hating on a product that ESPN
that they invest in?
Yeah, that's where these viewership numbers are coming. Yeah, it's a business you're in. It's not that they can't. And by the way, it's not that they can't be critical of certain things. They can have their opinions. But that's where I don't understand.
Her primary criticism was this. Both Smith and Sharpe work for ESPN. ESPN holds broadcasting rights and business ties to the WNBA. Therefore, in Bird's view, these two men had a conflict of interest and should not be publicly highlighting the league's struggles. It was a bold argument. It was also a deeply questionable one, and Stephen A. Smith was not going to let it slide without a response. Smith's answer to Bird's criticism was direct and, honestly, pretty difficult to argue with. He made the point plainly. Just because he works for ESPN does not mean he is obligated to ignore factual information about one of the properties ESPN covers. The idea that a journalist or commentator should selectively suppress accurate data because their employer has a financial stake in the subject is precisely the kind of editorial compromise that erodes credibility.
To talk about the attendance and says, like, basically that Caitlin had the highest attendance in the playoffs, which Caitlin Clark played her first 2 rounds in Connecticut, which only holds roughly 10,000, and they got swept, so they never made it back to Cambridge in Indiana to play a home game. So they absolutely did not have the high.
And Smith was not willing to make that compromise. What made Smith's position particularly notable was the context behind it. Throughout Caitlin Clark's entire rookie season, he had been one of her most consistent and vocal supporters on national television. He highlighted her performances. He pushed back against critics who tried to minimize her impact. He gave her credit openly and repeatedly at a time when certain corners of the sports media world seemed almost reluctant to do so. His support was not performative. It was consistent across months of coverage.
Stick around and want to watch the others. A rising tide lifts all boats, which is what we were saying, both Shannon Sharpe and myself, when we addressed that issue. Why would you say a quote like that? We work for ESPN, so I'm supposed to turn a blind eye and a deaf ear to the facts? That ain't what we do.
So when he pointed out that WNBA playoff viewership was down significantly without Clark in the picture, it was not coming from a place of hostility toward the league. It was coming from a place of honesty about a situation that the data made undeniable. Shannon Sharpe echoed the same sentiment.
When they got eliminated from the playoffs, the attendance dropped. Right. The ratings dropped. If WNBA is more, it is, and I get it. Why aren't people?
Both men had said from the beginning of the season that Caitlin Clark represented something the WNBA had never quite seen before, a player whose appeal extended far beyond the traditional women's basketball audience. A rising tide that was lifting every boat in the water. Their postseason commentary was simply a continuation of that same observation, now backed by hard evidence. Bird's accusation that their commentary was somehow an act of betrayal against the league missed the point entirely. And deep down, it is hard to believe she did not know that.
Stephen A. and with Shannon, there's an aspect of them like defending their stances on her. Like, we were right about Caitlin and this is our defense. And I still think there's something twisted there because nobody ever said that Caitlin wasn't going to be a marketing gem.
Here is the part of this story that the league would very much prefer to stay quietly in the background. During the 2024 WNBA playoffs, in arenas where Caitlin Clark was not competing, ticket prices were quietly but significantly reduced. This was not widely announced. It was not framed as a promotional initiative or a fan appreciation gesture. It was a behind-the-scenes adjustment designed to accomplish one specific goal, making sure that television cameras and in-arena footage would not show rows of empty seats during games that were supposed to represent the league at its highest level. And in a narrow, short-term sense, it worked. Arenas did not look completely empty on broadcast. Attendance figures, when reported as raw numbers, appeared reasonably solid. Sue Bird herself pointed to full-looking venues in places like Las Vegas and at TD Garden as evidence that the league was thriving. But the mechanism behind those numbers told a completely different story. When you drop ticket prices to $10 for a playoff game, you will fill seats. That is just basic economics. It does not mean demand is strong. It means the true market price for those seats, without Caitlin Clark on the floor, was closer to $10 than to what those same seats had been worth earlier in the season. The gap between the optics and the underlying reality was substantial. And rather than acknowledging that gap and treating it as useful information, as a signal worth taking seriously, there was a collective push from certain voices within the league to dismiss anyone who pointed it out as a hater, a critic, or someone who did not have the WNBA's best interests at heart. That framing was both unfair and counterproductive, because you cannot solve a problem you refuse to name. Sue Bird was not alone in her complicated relationship with Caitlin Clark's rise. Sheryl Swoopes, another genuine legend of the WNBA, had her own series of conflicting statements throughout the 2024 season. Swoopes is one of the most accomplished players in the history of women's basketball, a 3-time MVP, a multiple-time champion, and a player whose dominance in her era was absolutely real and legitimate. But her commentary on Clark throughout the year felt, at various moments, like it was struggling to find a consistent footing. At times, she acknowledged Clark's talent. At other moments, her tone shifted in ways that felt less like honest analysis and more like resistance to the narrative forming around Clark's impact. It was a pattern that left fans and commentators alike genuinely confused about where Swoops actually stood. And the thing is, Swoops and Bird are not isolated examples. There has been a visible, recurring tension between certain established voices in the WNBA world and the phenomenon that Caitlin Clark represents. Some players during the regular season were openly physical with Clark in ways that went beyond competitive basketball. There were moments that drew serious questions about whether the intensity directed at her was rooted in competition or something more personal. Resentment, perhaps, at the scale of attention she was commanding. The frustrating part of this pattern is what it reveals about human nature in competitive environments. When one person's success becomes so visible, so fast, and so undeniable, it has a way of making the people around them uncomfortable, even when that success is actively helping everyone in the same space. The rising tide argument is logically airtight. When Clark brought new viewers to the WNBA, those viewers did not only watch Fever games. They explored the league. They discovered other players. They bought merchandise and tickets for other teams. Her star power was not a zero-sum situation, but some people within that ecosystem seemed determined to treat it as though it was. Let's talk about what Caitlin Clark was actually dealing with on a personal and professional level, because it is easy to look at her numbers and her fame and assume that everything came easily. It did not even close. The pressure placed on Clark from the moment she entered the WNBA was unlike anything a rookie in women's basketball has ever had to carry. The comparisons being made at the time of her draft were genuinely staggering in their scope. People were drawing parallels to the kind of cultural weight that LeBron James carried when he entered the NBA straight out of high school. That is a level of expectation that would break most athletes before they ever got started. And yet Clark absorbed it. She went out for her professional debut and scored 20 points. She also had 10 turnovers in that same game, which sounds rough on paper until you sit with the context for a moment. A rookie in the professional game for the first time, playing under a national spotlight, dealing with physical defenders who had spent years developing their craft in arenas that were often at or beyond capacity, specifically because of her presence. 20 points in that environment is genuinely impressive. The fact that commentators were treating it with any skepticism at all says more about the impossible standard she was being held to than it does about her performance. One former WNBA player who was asked about defending Clark put it simply and honestly. Guarding her felt like guarding someone on a Steph Curry level. The way she operated off the ball, the range on her shooting, the speed of her decision-making, it was real. It was not hype propped up by marketing. The talent was actual, and the adjustment required to defend her was genuine. Calling her that dude and meaning it as the highest possible compliment was the most honest assessment of what she brought to the floor. She had come in as a unicorn. She had been called a marketing gem even by people who were reluctant to give her full credit for everything else. And every single thing she did, whether extraordinary or simply human, was dissected under a microscope that no other player in the league was subjected to. One wrong move, and there were 10 video clips ready to frame it as a character flaw or evidence of overrated status. It was exhausting to watch from the outside. What it must have felt like from the inside is genuinely difficult to imagine. And through most of it, Clark simply kept playing basketball. Here is the uncomfortable truth at the core of everything that happened during the 2024 WNBA playoffs, and it is a truth that the league cannot afford to keep dancing around indefinitely. Caitlin Clark is not just a good player. She is not just a popular rookie generating some extra buzz in her first year. She represents something structurally significant to the league's future, a once-in-a-generation convergence of talent, personality, marketability, and cultural timing that almost never arrives in this form. The WNBA has made genuine progress over the decades. The players are better than ever. The level of athleticism and skill on display every night is legitimately extraordinary. The league deserves more attention and respect than it has historically received, and that has always been true. None of that is in dispute. But progress and honesty are not mutually exclusive. You can believe deeply in the WNBA's potential and still acknowledge that Clark's presence moved the needle in ways that the league has not figured out how to replicate or replace. You can celebrate the league's growth and simultaneously recognize that lowering playoff ticket prices to $10 is a signal worth taking seriously rather than deflecting. The reaction from figures like Sue Bird, whatever the motivation behind it, pointed to a deeper anxiety within the league's inner circle, a fear that acknowledging Clark's singular impact would somehow diminish everything else, that crediting one player too heavily would undermine the collective. But that anxiety, however understandable it might be emotionally, leads to exactly the wrong response. It leads to attacking the people delivering accurate information instead of engaging with what that information actually means. The league needs to ask itself some hard questions. How do you build a structure that can develop and showcase the next Caitlin Clark before she arrives, rather than scrambling to fill the void after she is temporarily sidelined? How do you turn the viewers she brought in, fans who discovered women's basketball for the first time because of her, into long-term supporters of the entire league? How do you convert a moment into a movement and a movement into something permanent? Those are not questions that get answered by lowering ticket prices and hoping the cameras do not linger too long on empty courtside sections. They get answered by honest reckoning, strategic investment, and the willingness to say out loud that one player changed the landscape, and that this is actually a gift rather than a threat. What has happened to Caitlin Clark since her rise to national prominence is not entirely new. The pattern of an athlete ascending quickly and then becoming a target for the very people who should be celebrating her success is as old as competitive sport itself. But it lands differently in this context because of what is at stake. Women's basketball has been fighting for decades to earn the kind of mainstream attention and respect that would allow the league to truly flourish. Every step forward has been hard-won. Every moment of visibility has mattered. And then a player comes along who essentially supercharges that entire process, who does more in a single season to bring new eyes to the sport than many campaigns and initiatives managed to accomplish over years. And the response from some quarters is suspicion, resentment, and active resistance. It is baffling and it is frustrating in equal measure, because the math here is not complicated. More fans watching Caitlin Clark means more fans aware that the WNBA exists. More fans aware that the WNBA exists means more people willing to explore what else the league has to offer. More exploration means more merchandise sold, more tickets purchased, more sponsorship dollars attached to the brand, more media rights money, more of everything that makes a league sustainable and growing. Clark's success was never in competition with the league's success. It was always the same thing. The people who understood this from the beginning, Smith, Sharpe, and the growing chorus of voices who had watched Clark's college career and recognized what she was, were not wrong. They were simply ahead of the part of the conversation that was still catching up. And now, with the playoff ratings data sitting plainly in front of everyone, there is really nowhere left to hide from what it shows. The WNBA with Caitlin Clark and the WNBA without Caitlin Clark are measurably, meaningfully different products in terms of audience reach and fan engagement. That is not an insult to the other players. It is simply a fact about the nature of transformative star power and what it does to a league's visibility. The NBA understood this with Michael Jordan. It understood it again with LeBron James. It is past time for the WNBA to understand it with Caitlin Clark. So where does all of this land? Sue Bird is still one of the greatest players to ever step onto a WNBA court. That is not changed by the controversy or the pushback or the frustration she directed at Smith and Sharpe. Her legacy is intact regardless. But her argument in this specific instance, that commentators employed by ESPN should quietly overlook declining ratings out of loyalty to the brand, was both logically weak and potentially damaging to the league she clearly loves deeply. Protecting the WNBA's image by suppressing honest conversation about its challenges is not actually protecting it. It is delaying the reckoning. Stephen A., Smith, and Shannon Sharpe, for all the heat they took, were doing exactly what credible sport commentators are supposed to do. They were reading the available data, forming honest assessments, and saying what they saw. Their consistent support for Clark throughout the regular season made it even clearer that their postseason commentary was not rooted in any desire to tear the league down. It was rooted in the same basic commitment to honesty that had driven their coverage all year. And Caitlin Clark, she's going to keep playing basketball. She's going to keep drawing viewers. She's going to keep inspiring younger athletes and creating moments that end up on highlight reels and in conversations that bring new people into the orbit of women's basketball. The noise around her will continue, because that is what happens when someone changes a landscape. Not everyone adjusts to the new terrain at the same speed. But the direction of this story is not actually in doubt. More people are watching women's basketball today than were watching it before Caitlin Clark arrived. More people know who these players are. More people are paying attention. And whatever internal tensions that growth has exposed within the league, the growth itself is real and it is valuable. And it started because one player was genuinely, undeniably extraordinary. The question now is not whether the WNBA can survive without her for a stretch of time. It clearly can. The question is whether the people running and representing the league are willing to fully embrace what she represents and build something around it that lasts long after any single player's career is over. That is the conversation worth having. That is the question worth sitting with. And the answer, whatever it turns out to be, will define what the next chapter of women's basketball actually looks like. The WNBA is at a crossroads that most sports leagues would be grateful to face, because it means something real is happening, something with genuine momentum behind it. Whether the people holding the wheel choose to steer into that momentum or resist, it is going to matter enormously, not just for the next season, but for the long-term future of the sport. Think about that the next time someone tells you one player cannot really change a league. Sometimes one player is exactly what it takes. If this video gave you something to think about, drop your take in the comments below. I want to hear where you stand on all of this. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is a great time to change that. Hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications, and come back for the next one. There is a lot more to break down, and you do not want to miss it.